welcome to the Landscapes of Art and Earth. I'm your host, Shivani Gupta, and in this show, we will be having conversations with artists and environmentalists who can inform and connect us to the most important topics in our world today. Our guest for today's episode is scientist and storyteller Tanvi Dutta Gupta. Tanvi is a senior reporter at Bay Nature, where she's written about Chinook salmon and their return to Niles Canyon after 30 years, the adventures of a sound engineer who captures the audio we hear through meditation apps, and questions people have had about California Forever's environmental impact report on the new city they are developing in Solano County. Her focus is on environmental policy, conservation, species she's interested in, and environmental change makers in the Bay Area. Tanvi graduated from Stanford University, where she earned her master's and bachelor's in Earth Systems and Biology, respectively, with a minor in computer science and a notation in science communication. She's lived across India, Singapore, Hong Kong, London, and now the United States, and grew up writing about her experiences visiting rainforests and other natural habitats. One of Tanvi's focuses is bringing light to environmental justice efforts geared towards the global south. At Stanford, she conducted travel study and in situ research about how water temperature and currents affect deep sea fish populations for the Block Lab at Hopkins Marine Station. She also researched biocides, which are chemicals that destroy living organisms, and mosquito community ecology for the Hadley Lab. She's helped teach classes on environmental journalism and writing at Stanford, was a co-lead for the Environmental Justice Working Group, and co-initiated Fronds, an anthology of writers, artists, and storytellers sharing visions of an environmentally just world and how to make it possible. Tanvi is a leading force in the field of the environment and storytelling, and I'm incredibly honored and excited to have her as our guest for today's episode. Tanvi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for those kind words. It's really weird hearing everything read back. I'm not sure about leading force, but I'm really grateful to be here and get a chance to share some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited for our conversation. So I'd love to start just kind of from the beginning. Could you maybe walk us through one of the experiences you've had in the rainforests you visited in India and Singapore?
Yeah. I got really into nature around 7th grade. And I started I started taking advantage of sort of any opportunity I had to go and learn and find new species. I began really obsessed with finding all the species of butterflies I could, and then it sort of transitioned into birds over time. And a rainforest that really shaped me in Singapore is the forests around MacRitchie Reservoir, which is a reservoir in Singapore's central catchment. And I kind of started going on a lot of nature walks that were being held there to tell people about their biodiversity, because at the time the Singapore government was planning a subway line that would sort of cut under part of the forest. And so these walks are raising awareness of this biodiversity and of the nature in MacRitchie. And I have so many wonderful memories from the many hours I spent in the mid-morning sort of walking around. There really incredible snakes that we would come across just sort of at the end of the walk, darting across the path, or the moments when, we stand at this secondary forest where I know there used to be a village, but it's long since been overgrown. And one of my mentors taught us the call for how to for the abbot's babbler. And you just have those moments where I was thinking about these rainforests that I'd grown up along. I'd been in Singapore for 7 or 8 years at that point, and realizing how much there was to discover about even the smallest patch of land near my house. And that's, I think, what I remember most of all, is that every time I'd go out, I'd learn something new and realize that there was just so much to find there. And that made me really, really excited. And I kept thinking, how could anyone not care about this as soon as they start learning how much there is?
That's amazing. And for me personally, I grew up in the Bay Area and I'm currently based in the Bay Area as well. And um I there's so much I haven't explored. And since moving back to the Bay Area, I'm so excited to keep exploring what there is that's right in front of us. Um, and are there places right now, with your reporting in Bay Nature or in general in your free time that you enjoy visiting?
Yeah, I live in Berkeley right now, and I run a lot in my free time. So I spend a lot of time running to different places, and that's a lot of the way I get out in nature on the weekends. Yeah, I really, really love going up into Tilden, up in the Berkeley Hills, and I love finding all the scattered redwood groves over there, which have mostly been pretty intentionally preserved. And it's always really wonderful to be among the young redwoods and thinking about how much these hills have changed and what it's taken for these individual trees to survive. But the Bay Area has so many beautiful places that have taught me so much. I spent a lot of time at Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve when I was in college, and I learned a lot from just the diversity of the ecosystems there and getting to walk the trails with so many incredible scientists and naturalists and beginning to see sort of the web of ecosystems that knit the Bay Area together. Yeah, it's really interesting because the Bay Area's landscapes are so different from rainforests and the places I grew up in. And so I've had to learn a lot more about the way that climatic conditions and small differences between one hill and the other, one grassland and the other, change everything. And that's been really, really cool to learn the different ways of looking over here. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I love that you have kind of your own practice of experiencing the natural world, and it's been there, and that's what kind of formed your love for uh, your current work. I think that's really admirable and really exciting for me personally, and for so many others, that once you start experiencing the natural world, you can really build a relationship with it, and that's very exciting. Um, so I'd love to also ask you, um, given your intersection of journalism, the environment, and also with your work with artists and storytellers with Fronds, what drew you to the intersection of telling stories about the climate and the environment?
Yeah. I think I always, from sort of the first time I became obsessed with whales, I always used writing as a way of understanding and exploring and articulating my relationship with the natural world. Like when I was, in first grade in England, I would write poems about like flowers in spring, and they're really, really bad poems, but I made like these really stupid like illustrations in Microsoft Word to go alongside them. And I was always like, I think, writing about nature because I think those were the places and those were the experiences that I think had the most impact on me. And I kept a lot of sort of travel journals as a kid and would do a lot of just journaling and chronicling. And I think as I grew up and as I read more and I learned more about nature writing and what's not nature writing, and realized how much the stories I was reading about the natural world were influencing me, it made me want to start learning how to tell my own, even if just for myself. And so, yeah, I started just writing a lot. And I never thought of it as a career, honestly. I just thought of writing as my own practice, just to be making something that helped me understand what I was doing and why I was there, and what I would take in away from it. And I thought I would be most likely a full-time researcher, and I met so many researchers who are also such incredible writers, and so it seemed like a pretty natural way they went together. And as I went through college, I began to sort of understand more about how the field is changing and how arts, and I started being able to articulate a little bit more clear like how arts and the environment have had this really historical relationship, and thinking more about what does it look like if writing or art isn't just something you do in your spare time, but is centered as a way of, connecting with the natural world. Yeah, and that's something I was thinking more about, and I was thinking a lot of it more from just like giving people the spaces and the opportunities to tell their stories. And I think like less from like what am I doing and more from like there people are so talented and you just need to make sure that there's spaces for people to do what they want to do and make sure they know that this work is important, that being able to write down or make art or think about what you're doing in a way that's not just oriented towards like a marketable product of a scientific paper or like um, a research product or something you're selling, but something that lets you investigate on that deeper sort of personal level. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And, just in my experience, I was reading some of Fronds before our call, and it just shifted my energy. Just reading some of the poems in the anthology, it absolutely shifted. I'm trying to remember one that I was reading, but I just it was about being on a canoe, and seeing the northern lights and having a relationship with the northern lights and the universe. And I just thought how magical that these are on our planet. And it makes me sometimes I am indoors all day, and it made me realize there's an entire planet outside, and it truly just really just touched my heart. And um
Yeah.
it was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think every year I've helped with Fronds, I've just sort of been blown away by people are so talented and they make so many beautiful things. And I think of Fronds first and foremost as just a celebration of work. Like we're not, retaining exclusive rights to anyone's work. We're not like a competitive publication opportunity. The goal really is to just create a space that's celebrating these amazing pieces of art people are doing. And I think honestly for me it's a lot about creating that space of celebration. And I I'm it's always shocks me people are like actually also reading it because my main goal is to make the contributors feel celebrated. And it's really amazing to hear about what people take away when they read it too, because that always felt like feels like such an incredible bonus to get. Yeah, and I'm so glad that piece meant so much to you. Yeah, we've just been so privileged to have so many really, really incredible artists be willing to share their work with us to tell a story.
It's amazing. And so I'd actually love to dig deeper into your work with Franz. And how did you kind of, you worked with someone named Ayana Washington, to, so you both came together and put together the anthology. What was the process of kind of putting it together and working with the different storytellers and Stanford community to put it together?
Yeah. I actually worked with Ayana for the second anthology. So the first year, I was working. I mean, this was always a project that I did with me and Emily Polk, who is the person who has taught me everything about most things. She's a professor at Stanford in the program in writing and rhetoric, and is like just a really luminous writer and artist and teacher, who's been thinking for a lot longer than I have about the intersections of art and environmental justice. And I've learned so much from her and also Sybil Diver, who co-lead the environmental justice working group at Stanford. Um, but I was working with Emily in my senior year, and we were co-leads of the arts and environmental justice working group. And so we were doing a lot of work just thinking about like how do we build relationships between art spaces and environmental justice spaces on campus. And I was just sort of, and we'd meet every Friday in her office and just talk about what are all the things we could do. And we hosted theater workshops and concerts, and I got my friend to natural dye a bunch of cloth, and we cut it up into papers and into little pieces of cloth, and then got people to like draw their visions of environmentally just futures on them. And
Oh,
so we're just thinking about like all the different we were just thinking together about all the different ways arts can be used to imagine environmentally just futures. And yeah, so then I think we ended up basically yeah, and then so I was like, well, what if we did a little publication of all these stories and work that I know people are writing in classes. And um, in classes and in, in projects and like professors and emails and, like there's so much stuff that people are making. And so, yeah, I got a little bit of money to do it. And we just sort of pulled it together in like the last couple of weeks of the quarter. And it was really, really cool. And it was really cool to see how the community also came together to help make it happen. And yeah, and then did it again next year and then the year after. And the next year, basically, I did it with Ayana, who's I'd gotten to know through writers groups at Stanford. And so she's a really, really talented artist and writer. And yeah, was done a lot of, again, work in like arts and environmental justice and activism spaces on campus. So I worked with Ayana in year two, and then in year three, I basically redid it as a class, and so we did it. I helped write a proposal for a course, and so now it's EarthSys 131J at Stanford, Environmental Storytellers Collective, where basically students come together for like an hour every week over the course of 10 weeks and put together essentially Fronds from beginning to almost end. And yeah, so this year is the second year I've been teaching the class, and I think it'll be my last. And this year I'm working with this other student, Malinali Diaz, who's basically my TA and is going to take over as editor of Fronds after me. So it's really cool to kind of think about, especially in environmental justice spaces, so much of it is never just about one person. It's about the community you're building around you. And I've always wanted Fronds to be just about, not about me, but about everything, the spaces it can create for people to come together apart from me. And I'm really excited to be able to hand it off to someone else and think about where it'll grow in all the ways that I can't think of. Yeah, right now.
That's amazing. And you're really creating, there's a phrase that I try to incorporate in my day-to-day life, which is building something that will outlast me. And I feel like you're really doing that with your work and with Franz, and truly dedicated to a mission that's greater than, as you said, oneself. It's to a better future. Love to ask about um what does storytelling kind of do for you personally? When you write a story, what kind of experience do you have?
Yeah. Um, I think it's funny because I think I write a lot of different stories. I'm writing stories for my job as a journalist, and so a lot of those are stories where I'm looking through a bunch of interviews and notes and thinking about what's a story that's going to make sense to a reader. And often that's a process of trimming down all the thoughts I have into something that someone else can hold and receive and consume and understand what I mean. And so that's a process of a lot of editing and a lot of sort of whittling. I think of it as I'm carving something out of the sort of like really messy lump of, thinking and interviews and notes I have. And I write on my own sometimes. And I've my relationship with personal storytelling is ongoing and evolving. I think a lot about um, the way storytelling really centers the ego and ways to not do that, ways to not make it all about me. I think a lot of the ways that, but then I think about all the ways that storytelling has helped me articulate my own relationship with the world and understand my own place in it. Yeah, and I've been trying to think a lot about storytelling in terms of being able to tell stories about the small, not dramatic things in life, and trying to use storytelling as a way of just learning to observe what's happening around me. I think a lot about the way that shaping something into a story, into a narrative, making sure it has a beginning and a middle and an end and characters and tension and like these elements that any story needs to be a story, how that ultimately is a destructive process. When you tell a story about something, you are leaving something out to make it a narrative. you're leaving out, nothing has a beginning or neat ending in life. And when you're telling a story about something, you're sort of ripping it from this context and reshaping it into something that people can hold. And often that experience can grow, and often that experience can shrink, and it just becomes a different thing. A story is a translation of what's happening already. And so yeah, I think a lot about that as well. And maybe that's like a little bit abstract, but I think about a lot in terms of journalism when I'm trying to report a story, and I know that I'm doing people a disservice because there are things I'm leaving out in service of making this something people can read. And I think about a lot for myself when I'm telling stories about my own life, and how in many ways I'm lying to myself about things, or I'm reshaping things so that they're easier for me to understand. And yeah, it's interesting. I think, yeah, I guess I spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between storytelling and truth, and even that in and of itself is a story. And so, yeah, it's, yeah, my relationship storytelling is changing all the time, but it's always a part of the way I'm thinking about the world. Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing. That's so profound for me to learn because, especially like, let's say writing, I mean, college essays can be very different from, journalistic storytelling. But, for example, learning the 5 paragraph method, and that completely goes down the, um, it's not applicable anymore in college academic papers, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Um, and I feel like when I was reading some of your stories on Bay Nature, I just felt like you had a way of integrating all of the details and doing so in a subtle way, but they're still there, and it's an artful way of doing it. And I'd love to, learn a little bit more about your process for telling stories, and writing. What is one thing that, I mean, in addition to the incredible nugget you just shared, what is one thing that has helped you in your writing to kind of either add to the perspective that we don't need the beginning, middle, end structure, or another tidbit that's helped you with expanding your mind for telling stories?
Yeah. First of all, we do need a beginning, middle, and structure. No story works without one. There are like stories in a way can be pretty formulaic. There are things you need to make a story work. And yeah, I mean, I think I first, and I think any good things about my articles on Bay Nature, like all credit to my editors. Like I am so lucky to work with such talented people who have made my writing so much better, and have taught me so many specific things that I use and think about constantly. Um, I think a lot about when I'm writing something down. I'm thinking about um, my editor has this technique, or this phrase she calls the Wisconsin dairy method, which is basically that you leave something alone and then the next day you come back to it and like the cream floats to the top. So like, and it's sort of this, it's a little, I was talking to her about this yesterday. It's a little bit of a get out of jail free card where you're like, my memory of what's good is the ultimate arbiter of what's good. But but I think what it essentially, and what she encourages me to do a lot, is just think about what is most interesting to you, and what is the detail that I'm excited about. And I think one of the most helpful like ways I do storytelling, or that makes my stories better, is just telling other people the stories over and over. So I make everyone listen to me talk like constantly, whether it's like my girlfriend or like, my like editors or my parents or whatever. I'm like, here's the thing I'm working on. And then you can pay attention to what they're paying attention to, and understand what are the details that are rising up for you. What are the details that are important to you? And I'm like, okay, like I know those are the things I want to include. And then there are also like non-negotiables of like, well, I need to explain that this thing happened at this point in time. And I need to explain that, this tension happened, and I need to have an introduction that's compelling, and I need to have an ending that ends somewhere. And so, yeah. And in a way, like you start having all of these pieces, and then I'm a pretty visual person when it comes to my stories. I think about them, it's not that I draw them out, but I just think about them as sort of like frameworks that I'm, or skeletons that I'm carrying around in my head, and I'm like moving around like bits of like things from like one part to another. And so I think about the chains, the chains of logic that I'm sort of building up on. And so I think about it a lot in terms of like what are the steps that'll bring a reader from like one part to the next. Yeah, and I'm very bad at the 5 paragraph structure because I never want to write a thesis, which is very bad for journalism because you do need a nut graph, which I've learned over and over. But I never want to give away the ending, which is what I feel like a hypothesis often does, because I always think of it as sort of just like building on, like you introduce a reader somewhere and then you're sort of, you want to figure out, okay, like what's the next thing that happens to follow up on this sort of logical train. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. Like, is it like wanting to take a reader to it through the story rather than telling them exactly what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just sort of taking people on like a logical, on a journey, and I think of it as like a journey that, you know, you're going from like step 1 to step 2, and like making sure that each step you're leading them kindly. You're not like dropping them in like a middle of a huge logical gap and you're like, now figure it out. But you're thinking about, yeah, you're sort of taking them by the hand and leading them gently down like each like logical nook and cranny.
I love that. Um,
Yeah.
is that something that you practice more in your journalism or also in your personal writing, or it kind of depends?
Well, I think my personal writing I'm not getting paid for, so I get to kind of fuck around a lot more. So I'm trying, I mean there's so many things that are just fun to try. A lot of it is just like trusting a reader, leaving a big gap in the middle of like non sequitur, paragraph 1, paragraph 2. And I think there's a lot of fun and beauty in like letting a reader guess, fill in, make the logical connection themselves. And there's a lot to be said for just trusting a reader to make that, to figure out what lies in there. I think, and that comes a lot just basic show not telling, but I think it's really fun when a reader themselves gets to make a story their own. And I think when you leave natural gaps or natural, you know, a reader can sort of fill in what's going on. I think I'm working a lot. I mean, this is like, I think also a journalistic thing, but just on being more restrained in my writing, not trying to say everything and figuring out, yeah, how you say more maybe in the process. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm sure, does that apply in your teaching as well? Kind of thinking how you can let your students come to the conclusion on their own?
I feel like I'm a very lazy teacher. And I hesitate a lot to think of myself as a teacher because I think of myself way more as just um like what do you say, like I think of myself way more as like uh not even a leader, as just like a facilitator. So I think a lot of like Fronds, a lot of like that class, a lot of that deal was honestly just being like, hey guys, we need to do this thing. Okay, here's 15 minutes, start doing the thing. Like, and I'll try and provide like as much scaffolding and, there obviously to be as a resource. But I feel like a lot of my teaching practice, which feels really weird to say because I don't think I have a teaching practice, and I don't really think of myself as a teacher most of the time, but it's just sort of like letting people cook, honestly. Like people have ideas. When you put people with different ideas together, things almost always get better when they're all willing to work together towards something. And I am most excited about just creating the spaces where people can just brainstorm and make things together. Yeah.
I love that. Creating the spaces for the ideas to come about.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, I'd love to ask about kind of going back to your experience doing research as well with the Jasper Ridge experience, as well as um, working with the Hadley Lab and the Block Lab at Hopkins Marine Station. I'd love to kind of ask about, is there, I read that you sailed from Hawaii to Palmyra with the Sea Education Association. Could you maybe tell us about that experience and that maybe a memorable time for that lab research experience?
Yeah, I mean, that was like such a cool experience. Like truly like the journey of a lifetime. That's like sort of a study, not a study. I joke that it wasn't a study abroad, it was a study aboard that Stanford does. Because we didn't actually end up leaving US waters most of the time. So we didn't really like leave the country, but we were definitely far away. Um, it was really cool. I'd been like so excited about Stanford at Sea, that's what the program is called, since like before I applied to Stanford. And like before I applied to Stanford, I read every single blog anyone had ever posted from Stanford at Sea. And I was like, oh my God, that's literally the coolest thing on the planet. Like I will die. And yeah, and actually doing it is really interesting because it's just like I came to Stanford at Sea and I've been dreaming about it for so long. And I was like just an older person, like just with 3 or 4 years older, like after the pandemic. And yeah, that was really interesting. I learned like so much, and there are so many memories that stay with me from that time. I journaled a lot on the boat, and I got a chance to do a lot of photography, which was also really fun. And yeah, like snorkeling in Palmyra was incredible. Like it just the most such beautiful coral reefs. I was looking at a photo just yesterday. It came up on just like I was just sort of bending over the bow of the boat and looking at a manta ray that was just like in the water below. Yeah, I some of the most fun times are just like standing around at 3 a.m. like having hot chocolate and sort of just like looking at the stars. I remember I think one of my favorite moments was one day when we were doing a conductivity temperature depth measurement at night. And we had the lights shining off the side of the boat, and like hundreds of flying fish babies kind of came to the side of the boat, and it looked like the sea was like full of angels. Because they all were just like sort of wings spread, and it was so beautiful. Yeah, and it was just like I'll never be in those places again. Like it was, and I remember like when we came back to land, like I was so sad. It was so weird to be like, oh, and now most likely I'll be seeing land again for the rest of my life. But I had this like really miraculous, we all had this really like really amazing and hard and often scary and sad, but also like unique time where just we spent like 2 weeks on the open ocean without like land in sight. And yeah, it's a very old tradition. It's so many people have done it. And yeah, it was really, really special.
That's amazing. When you didn't experience the when you were at sea and you didn't see the land for the when you first kind of couldn't see the land, what was your initial reaction?
Um, I think I was just excited. Like I think I'm trying to remember when he first didn't see land. Oh yeah, I was stressed. But mostly because we were losing phone service, and I had people were texting me about things that I needed to figure out, and I could see the bars disappearing, and I knew I wouldn't be able to figure these things out for the next 5 weeks because I wouldn't have phone service again. And I was extremely stressed because I was like, everything's going wrong everywhere else, and I'm just gonna kind of come back to a hot mess. Um, but also just kind of like freeing in that way because it's like that's now all of that what's going on in that like organization is someone else's problem until I come back in 5 weeks, and then it'll be my problem again. So I was stressed in that specific moment, but um not really for reasons of like leaving behind land. But I was excited, it's just a different way of understanding the horizon. Yeah.
That's amazing. I've always wanted to learn how to sail, so maybe one day we can both go sailing.
Yeah.
That would be so fun.
Yeah.
And then I'd also love to kind of transition a little bit into, we delved into this a little bit earlier, and I'd love to transition back to go a little deeper into kind of the power of art to make a change in the environmental crisis. Um,
Mhm.
what have you found? Has there been an artist whose work, or a writer whose work, who you've really admired or has maybe inspired your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super basic, but I think I've been really influenced by Robert Macfarlane and his writing. I think his work was the first work I read, and I was like, oh, that's what nature writing is. And I remember reading his book, The Old Ways, and then Mountains of the Mind, and just reading them and being like, oh my God, you stole all my thoughts. Like, and I had this moment of like looking at the things I was writing, and I was like, writing all these things about like these moments when the mountains just feel bigger than you. And I was like, oh, wait, like I thought it was super profound, but like people have been saying this for ages. And I think McFarlane in particular is very good in his writing about putting his work in the context of everyone who's written about those ideas before him and really positioning his work in like a lineage of other writers. And so I think reading Robert McFarlane was great for just like understanding a little bit more about what nature writing is and that very sort of typical version of the genre of a white man in England goes for a walk. But also like understanding like, oh, there's like this whole like ecosystem, this whole world of nature writing that's been doing this work for a really long time, and that was so was really useful to understand. So I think McFarlane has influenced my writing a lot, like on a material level as well. I think I really like the way he uses verbs, he uses adjectives. I think the way he crafts his similes are really interesting. So on a mechanical level, yeah, I think there's so many other like writers and artists whose work I enjoy. But I think another book that I've recommended to like almost absolutely everyone, and again, this is pretty McFarlane pilled with me because he was a big supporter of this book, but Yuval Aves's Intertitle is like one of the best books I've ever read. It's a really incredible book, and it's, I think, like I've really, really excited to see Indian environmental spaces getting the same kind of attention and the same kind of, yeah, I think like so many American and British and European spaces have gotten their books and books and books written about them and their celebrations, and so many Indian spaces have not had that same modern wealth of literature. There's obviously a lot of historical writing in India, and I think it's really exciting to see people like Arti Kumar Rao and Yuvan Aves like, write these beautiful homages and these really, yeah, these really beautiful pieces about, Chennai's shorelines and like rivers and deserts. And yeah, I get that. That's just like really, really inspiring to me. And yeah, they're
That's
the people I also learned, like T.R. Shankar Raman, like he wrote The Wild Heart of India, and like these researchers I learned from in high school too, who have done so much like really beautiful public writing. So I've, yeah, learned a lot from those people.
there's so many books I need to add to my reading list, and I'm so excited. And I'm thinking, I haven't been to India since 2013, and I'm Indian myself, and I feel like it would be such an incredible way to learn about India's um, natural habitats, just by reading this art. And um, I think um, I'm just so excited to read them, and I'd love to ask a little bit more about the stories that need to be told from India, or other countries in the world. What is one story that you would like to be seen or to be told more of?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm honestly the best person to answer that question. I've visited India a little, like every year, but I haven't lived there ever. But I honestly just want to see more stories. I think I'm very conscious of how there's a lot of money and power that goes towards art spaces in the US just because government has more money. And I want to just be able to see more, like I don't even say I want to see more spaces because I don't think I know enough about what's happening right now, but I want there to be so many stories and about what's happening in India and Southeast Asia. I think there's a real shift of global power happening. There is a lot of faith being lost in the US government, I think, among many people. And I think there's a lot in India that's like, we don't need, Western spaces. Like, we have the money and the power and the resources to do it ourselves. And that isn't always happening in like an ecologically or environmentally friendly way, but there are big changes happening that I hear about. And so, yeah, I want to just be able to hear, be able to see, like, I want, like, my dream is just to like be able to see like the granular attention that I can pay to the Bay Area and my job, where we're like, oh my God, these, 4 miles of shoreline are being changed. Where in India, like a comparable thing would be 400 miles of shoreline. I want that granular attention to be able to be paid to everywhere else in the world, especially places that have not been historical centers of power. Yeah. And modern centers of power. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to ask about one more question, which is, you've been involved with many areas of, the intersection of environment, art, and storytelling, whether it's your personal writing, Fronds, your research, your journalistic work, and so many other areas. If someone is looking to enter this field, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really, I think I'm still figuring out what to do with my life and where this field will take me. Journalism is a way that you get to do a lot of those things. Obviously, journalism is an imperfect industry. But I think to get started in journalism, to get started in any of these spaces, you just kind of need to start doing the work and you don't need to wait for people to give you permission. I think I'm just more and more excited about people who are just going out and writing the thing or doing the research and not waiting for someone to assign it to them. And so, yeah, and I think there are obviously very real economic forces of most people cannot afford to go and spend, 10 hours of their time doing something they're not getting paid for. But I am just like more and more excited about, those like people who are starting things, and what I want to keep believing is that people want to consume, want to read, want to understand good art. And at the very least, when you're telling the stories you want or reading the stories you want, you are understanding more about the other people who you might work with and the other people who you might be able to think through things with. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tanvi. This was amazing. And is there any last note that you'd love to leave our listeners with?
Um, I can't think of anything. Yeah, I'm really grateful to have had the chance to blab around about so many of my thoughts. Yeah, I'm glad. Thank you so much for creating this space, Shivani. This is a super cool project you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tanvi. This was an incredible conversation. I learned so much about your storytelling, your experiences, traveling by sea from Hawaii to Palmyra, your journey into your current work today, and visions that you have for the future. And I learned so much. And thank you so much for your time and your energy. And um, you know, thank you everyone for listening as well. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach me at shivanigupta416 at gmail.com. And we'll see you next time on the Landscapes of Art and Earth.